between death and life. The final verses of the first prose section tell us that the news of all of the disasters that had fallen on Job reached the ears of three of his friends. Each of them set out from home: Eliphaz of Teman, Bildad of Shua, and Zophar of Namath. And by common consent they decided to go and offer him sympathy and consolation. 2:11. The intention of the newcomers is to share their friend's suffering and ease it to some degree. They will not desert him in his suffering, and to this extent they act meritoriously. They are serious, learned men, though perhaps oversure of their wisdom. They will try to explain to Job the reason for what is happening to him, because when adversity is understood, it is easier to bear. First, however, Job breaks a long silence with a monologue expressing his intense grief at a fate to which he would prefer death or not having been born. Despite this reaction, and as happens with other great sufferers, Job retains his hope in the God who gave him the gift of life. The three friends were so moved by Job's plight that before they spoke, they wept. Then they sat there on the ground beside him for 7 days and 7 nights. To Job, they never spoke a word, for they saw how much he was suffering. 2:13. Their attitude was one of respectful compassion that showed how seriously they regarded their friend's situation. The silent sharing of suffering is a manifestation of fellowship. At this point, the poetic section of the book begins. It comprises lengthy speeches by Job, his friends, a new and unexpected personage named Elihu, and, finally, God. The purpose of the speeches is to discover the meaning of God's behavior in relation to what happens to the central figure of the book, and in human life generally. Job's misfortune continues and seems to intensify beyond what was indicated in his initial reaction to it. The monologue that opens the most substantial part of the book is characterized by great poetic beauty and gives heart-rending expression to this gradual immersion in suffering. The opening lines already set the tone. In the end, it was Job who broke the silence and cursed the day of his birth. This is what he said: "Perish the day on which I was born, and the night that told of a boy conceived." 3:1-3. There is question here once more of speaking. Job curses the day of his birth. He does not curse God, but he does complain about God. He experiences his suffering as an abandonment by God. He therefore wishes that night might swallow him up, that the world might be covered with darkness, that all might revert to its pre-creation state when the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. Genesis 1:2. And God had not yet said, "Let there be light." May that day be darkness. May God on high have no thought for it. May no light shine on it. May murk and shadow dark as death claim it for their own. Clouds hang over it. Eclipse sweep down on it. Sea, let obscurity seize on it. From the days of the year let it be excluded. Into the reckoning of the months not find its way. 3:4-6. Job's suffering causes him to see the universe as chaotic, as lacking the presence of God. From it, God is absent as the one who creates it and shapes it into a cosmos. But Job goes further. He looks for an impossible retrogression to the time before his birth. He asks, why they let him be born. Why was I not stillborn? Or why did I not perish as I left the womb? Why give light to a man of grief? Why give life to those bitter of heart, who long for a death that never comes, and hunt for it more than for buried treasure? They would be glad to see the grave mound, and shout for joy if they reached the tomb. Why give light to one who does not see his way, whom God shuts in all alone? 3:11, 20-23. Faced with the reality of his present existence, Job would prefer death, or, even better, never to have been born. Moreover, in his experience, human life seems so chaotic that there can be no solution to social inequalities, except in the realm of death. The call for justice that plays an important part in the book of Job, as we shall see, is here presented in an ironic connection with death. Down there, the wicked bustle no more. There, the weary rest. Prisoners, all left in peace, hear no more the shouts of the oppressor. High and low are there together, and the slave is free of his master. 3:17-19. The meaning is not that Job chooses death against life, as seen in the dichotomy presented in Deuteronomy. This day I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore choose life, that you and your descendants may live, loving the Lord your God, obeying his voice and cleaving to him, for that means life to you. Deuteronomy 30:19-20. Rather, Job finds that, for me there is no calm, no peace, my torments banish rest. 3:26. Into this he would prefer not to have been born. In a sense, he is trying to locate himself in a time before the choice between life and death, in the time before birth. That is how far his suffering drives him. Job's response is so radical as to be baffling. It can have sprung only from a very deep and unbearable misery. Existence, after all, is a gift of the God of life. What then can it mean to desire not to have received this divine gift? The author may have been inspired by the prophet Jeremiah, who, in a famous passage, uses expressions very like those of Job. Cursed be the day on which I was born, the day which my mother bore me, let it not be blessed. Cursed be the man who brought the news to my father, a son is born to you, making him very glad. Let that man be like the cities which the Lord overthrew without pity. Let him hear a cry in the morning and an alarm in noon, because he did not kill me in the womb. So my mother would have been my grave, and her womb forever great. Why did I come forth from the womb to see toil and sorrow, and spend my days in shame? Jeremiah 20:14-18. The cries of Jeremiah and Job are cries of torment in a cruel situation. What wonder then, Job will say, if my words are wild? 6:3. They are not a rejection of God. In fact, it might well be claimed that this manifestation of irrepressible feeling expresses, even in an unconventional form, a profound act of self-surrender and hope in God. It springs from a situation of suffering that has no intelligible cause. Cesar Vallejo puts it in blank verse in his Trilce. My pain is so deep that it never had a cause, and has no need of a cause. What could its cause have been? Where is that thing so important that it stopped being its cause? Its cause is nothing, and nothing could have stopped its being. Why has this pain been borne all of its own? To a superficial reader, the paradoxical thing about this poem is the surprising title Vallejo gives it. I am going to talk about hope. The hope is doubtless one that does not travel beaten paths, but it is not therefore any less firm. It is a hope that is unaccompanied by any boastful rational grasp of things, and yet is clear-eyed. Vallejo's poem, like the poet's own life, expresses the deep, inexplicable suffering of the Latin American poor. In this case, the historical bewilderment and sadness of the indigenes as they saw the vital framework of their world collapsing is accompanied today by the exploitation and despoliation of the ordinary people. But the poem also shows the stubborn hope that gives heart to this poor believing people. Job may have been led to his monologue in like manner. A profound experience underlies its candid and heartfelt expression of suffering. He will have occasion to reveal this experience during the grueling debate that begins. Despite his sometimes cutting and bitter complaints and protests, he does not, in fact, despair, as we shall see.